The sweat-stained dollar bills trembled in Clara Bennett's hands as she stood outside the Silver Spur Saloon, every muscle in her body aching from another 14-hour shift serving whiskey and dodging wandering hands. It was August 1883 in Tombstone, Arizona territory, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street as she stared at the empty space where her wages should have been. For the fourth week in a row, Silas Crowder had looked her straight in the eye and told her the saloon's funds were tied up, that she would have to wait just a little longer, that her loyalty would be rewarded. But Clara knew the truth when she saw it. She had watched him count out crisp bills to the card dealers and the piano player while she got nothing but promises and that oily smile that made her skin crawl. She was 22 years old and alone in a town that chewed up women like her and spit them out. Her parents had died of fever on the wagon trail west 2 years ago, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a stubborn determination to survive. The boarding house where she rented a cramped room on the third floor was run by Mrs. Hargrove, a stern-faced widow who had made it clear that rent was due every Friday without exception. Tomorrow was Friday, and Clara was 8 weeks behind. She had begged, borrowed time, and stretched every excuse as thin as it would go, but Mrs. Hargrove's patience had finally snapped that morning. Clara's stomach twisted as she remembered the landlady's words, delivered in a voice like iron scraping stone. "You have until sundown tomorrow to pay what you owe, Miss Bennett, or your belongings will be on the street, and your room will go to someone who can actually pay for it." The shame of it burned hotter than the August heat. Clara had always prided herself on making her own way, on never being a burden, on standing on her own 2 feet no matter what the world threw at her. But Silas Crowder was stealing her dignity one unpaid week at a time, and she felt powerless to stop it. She had already asked everyone she knew for help. The other saloon girls were just as broke as she was, living hand to mouth and sending whatever they could spare back to families in worse situations. The shopkeepers she had befriended were kind but struggling themselves. There was nowhere left to turn. Clara was about to walk back inside and confront Silas one more time, to beg if she had to, when she heard the distinctive jingle of spurs on the wooden boardwalk behind her. She turned and found herself looking up at a man she had noticed in the saloon a few times over the past weeks, but had never actually spoken to. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue like storm clouds over the desert, and they were fixed on her face with an expression that was equal parts concern and barely contained anger. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the cadence of Texas. "But I could not help overhearing your conversation with Mr. Crowder just now. Is it true he has not paid you for 4 weeks of work?" Clara felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She hated the idea that anyone had witnessed her humiliation, that this stranger had heard her pleading for money that was rightfully hers, but there was something in his eyes that was not pity, not contempt. It was fury, but not directed at her. "That is none of your concern, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her hands shook. "I can handle my own affairs." "I am sure you can," he replied, tipping his hat with a respect she was not used to receiving. "But I have been in this territory long enough to know when a man is taking advantage of someone who has no recourse. My name is James Merrick, and I work cattle for the Running W Ranch about 10 miles north of here. I come into town every couple of weeks for supplies and a game of cards, and I have seen how hard you work in there. No one should have to serve drinks and clean tables for 14 hours a day without getting paid for it." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She could not afford to cry in the middle of the street where everyone could see. She could not afford to show weakness, but James Merrick seemed to understand without her having to say a word. He stepped closer, positioning himself so that his broad shoulders blocked her from the view of passers-by on the street, giving her a moment of privacy. "How much does he owe you?" James asked quietly. Clara swallowed hard. $32, she whispered. $8 a week for 4 weeks. It might not sound like much to some folks, but it is everything to me. I owe my landlady rent, and I have not eaten a proper meal in 3 days because I have been trying to save every penny I can scrounge. If I do not pay her by tomorrow at sundown, I will be homeless. She watched something shift in James Merrick's expression, a hardening of his jaw, and a dangerous glint in those gray-blue eyes. Without a word, he turned on his heel and pushed through the swinging doors of the Silver Spur Saloon. Clara stood frozen for a moment, not sure what was happening, before she hurried after him. The saloon was dim and smoky after the bright sunlight outside. A handful of men sat at tables nursing drinks, even though it was barely past 2 in the afternoon. The piano player was taking a break, and the only sound was the murmur of conversation and the clink of glass on wood. Silas Crowder stood behind the bar polishing glasses with a rag that had probably not been clean in a month. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a mustache that drooped over his thick lips. His eyes were small and mean, and they narrowed when he saw James approaching. "Something I can do for you, Cowboy?" Silas asked, his tone dismissive. James did not slow down. He walked right up to the bar and planted both hands on the scarred wood surface, leaning forward so that he was eye to eye with the saloon owner. "You owe Miss Bennett $32 in wages," James said, his voice carrying through the room. "I am here to collect it for her." Silas laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Is that so? And who the hell are you to come in here making demands?" "I am someone who does not like seeing hard-working people get cheated," James replied, his voice dropping to a tone that made Clara's spine tingle with equal parts fear and something else she could not quite name. "Now you can pay her what you owe her, or we can have a different kind of conversation." Several of the men at the tables had stopped their card games and conversations to watch. Clara felt her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to tell James to stop, that it was not worth getting into a fight over, but the words stuck in her throat. Because part of her, the part that was tired and hungry and scared and so angry she could taste it, wanted to see what would happen next. Silas's face reddened. "I already told the girl that business has been slow. I will pay her when I have the money. Now get out of my establishment before I have you thrown out." "Business has been slow?" James repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He gestured around the saloon. "You have got a full house here most nights. I've seen you counting money at that bar, stacks of it. You have been paying your piano player and your dealers and yourself, I would wager. But somehow you cannot find $32 for a woman who works herself to the bone for you?" "What I pay my employees and when I pay them is my business," Silas snapped. "Now I will not tell you again to get out." James straightened up and Clara saw his hand move to rest casually on the gun belt at his hip. He did not draw the weapon, did not even touch the grip, but the implication was clear. The saloon went completely silent. "I think you misunderstand the situation," James said calmly. "I am not asking you to pay her. I am telling you. You are going to open your cash box right now and count out $32. Then you are going to give it to Miss Bennett with an apology. And then you are going to promise that from this day forward she will be paid every Friday without fail. Or I will come back here and we will finish this conversation in a way you will not enjoy." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in James's eyes must have convinced him that this cowboy was not bluffing. Clara held her breath as the saloon owner reached under the bar and pulled out a dented metal cash box. His hands were shaking slightly as he unlocked it and began counting out bills and coins onto the bar. 8, 16, 24, 32, Silas muttered, slapping the money down harder than necessary. "There. Happy now?" James did not touch the money. Instead, he turned slightly and gestured to Clara. "The money belongs to Miss Bennett. You give it to her directly, and you give her that apology I mentioned." For a moment, Clara thought Silas might refuse, but then he shoved the money across the bar toward her. "Here," he said through gritted teeth, "sorry for the delay." It was the least sincere apology Clara had ever heard, but she did not care. She stepped forward on shaking legs and gathered up the bills and coins, clutching them to her chest like they were made of gold. $32, 4 weeks of wages, enough to pay Mrs. Hargrove and have a little left over for food. She felt dizzy with relief. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, though she was not sure if she was talking to Silas or to James. James tipped his hat to her, then turned back to the saloon owner. "Remember what I said, Crowder. Miss Bennett gets paid every Friday from now on. If I hear otherwise, I will be back." He did not wait for a response. Instead, he placed a hand lightly on the small of Clara's back and guided her toward the door. She went willingly, her mind spinning, her heart still racing. As they stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, she finally found her voice. "I do not understand," she said, looking up at James with wide eyes. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." James smiled, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger and more approachable. "Maybe I wanted to get to know you," he said simply. "And maybe I was raised to believe that a man stands up for what is right, especially when someone cannot stand up for themselves. No offense intended." "None taken," Clara said quickly. She looked down at the money in her hands, then back up at him. "I do not know how to thank you. This money, it means everything. I would have been on the street tomorrow without it." "You do not need to thank me," James said. "But if you would allow me, I would like to walk you home. Make sure you get there safely with your wages." Clara hesitated. She had learned to be wary of men who offered help, because in her experience, most of them expected something in return. But there was nothing but genuine concern in James Merrick's eyes, no hidden agenda that she could detect. And after what he had just done for her, standing up to Silas Crowder like that, she found herself wanting to trust him. "All right," she said softly. "I am staying at the Hargrove boarding house on 3rd Street. They walked in silence for a few minutes, Clara acutely aware of the tall cowboy beside her. The streets of Tombstone were busy with the usual afternoon activity. Wagons rumbled past, kicking up dust. Miners fresh from their shifts congregated outside the assay office. Women in bonnets hurried between shops with baskets over their arms. Clara had walked these streets 1,000 times, but somehow everything looked different with James Merrick beside her. "How long have you been in Tombstone?" James asked as they turned onto 3rd Street. 2 years, Clara replied. "My parents and I were headed to California, but they both took sick with fever on the trail. They died within days of each other. And by the time I got here, I had nothing left. No money, no family, nowhere to go. I took the first job I could find, which was at the Silver Spur." "I am sorry about your parents," James said, and the sincerity in his voice made Clara's throat tighten. "That must have been hard, losing them both and being alone in a strange place." "It was," Clara admitted, "but I learned to manage. I've always been good at surviving even when things get difficult, though I will admit the past few weeks have tested me more than usual." "Crowder should be horsewhipped for what he did to you," James said, his jaw tightening again. "Stealing wages from his employees, it is lower than low." "He is not a good man," Clara agreed, "but he is far from the worst I have encountered. At least he kept his hands to himself, which is more than I can say for some of the customers." James stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "If anyone ever puts their hands on you without your permission, you tell me. I do not care who they are or what position they think they hold. No one has the right to touch you if you do not want to be touched." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfurl in Clara's chest. She had been taking care of herself for so long, fighting her own battles and solving her own problems, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone in her corner. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I will remember that," she said quietly, "though I confess I still do not understand why you care. We have never even spoken before today." James started walking again, and Clara fell into step beside him. "I have been watching you," he admitted, and then quickly added, "That sounds worse than I meant it. What I mean is, I have noticed you. Every time I come into town and stop by the Silver Spur for a drink or a game of cards, I see you working. You are always kind to everyone, even the men who do not deserve it. You work harder than anyone else in that place, and you never complain. I admire that. And I suppose I have been working up the courage to introduce myself properly for weeks now. Clara felt her cheeks warm. You were working up the courage to talk to me? Yes, ma'am, James said with a slightly sheepish grin. I am better with horses and cattle than I am with pretty women. I kept telling myself I would say something the next time I came to town. But then I would see you and lose my nerve. When I heard Crowder refusing to pay you today, though, something in me just snapped. I could not stand by and let that happen. They had reached the boarding house, a 3-story structure with peeling paint and sagging shutters. Clara stopped at the bottom of the steps and turned to face James, clutching her wages tightly. Well, I am glad you lost your patience with him, she said. Though I would have been happy if you had just introduced yourself under less dramatic circumstances. James laughed, and the sound was rich and warm. I will try to be less dramatic in the future. May I ask you something, Miss Bennett? Clara, she corrected him. After what you just did for me, I think we can dispense with the formalities. What did you want to ask? Would you allow me to call on you? James asked. Properly, I mean. I would like to take you to dinner, or maybe for a walk when you have time off from the saloon. I would like to get to know you better if you are willing. Clara's heart did a strange little flip in her chest. She had been asked out by men before, plenty of them, but those invitations had always felt like propositions more than genuine interest. This was different. James Merrick was different. He had stood up for her, defended her, collected her wages without expecting anything in return, and now he was standing here in the dusty street looking almost nervous as he waited for her answer. I would like that, Clara said, and was rewarded with a smile that made her knees feel weak. I have Sundays off. Most of them anyway, unless Silas decides he needs me to work. If he tries to make you work on your day off, you let me know, James said firmly. How about this Sunday? I could come by around noon and we could take a walk, maybe get some lunch at the hotel restaurant if you're hungry. That sounds perfect, Clara said. She hesitated, then added, Thank you, James, for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I truly mean it. You saved me today. I do not know what would have happened if you had not stepped in. You would have figured something out, James said confidently. You are a survivor, Clara Bennett. Anyone can see that. But I am glad I could help, and I'm even more glad that it gave me an excuse to finally talk to you. Clara felt herself blushing again. She was not used to feeling this way, all fluttery and uncertain and hopeful. It was dangerous to let herself hope, she knew that. Hope could lead to disappointment, and disappointment was something she could not afford. But looking up at James Merrick with his kind eyes and his honest smile, she found herself willing to take the risk. I should go pay Mrs. Hargrove before she decides to throw my things out a day early, Clara said reluctantly. But I will see you Sunday at noon? You have my word, James promised. He tipped his hat to her one more time. Until then, Clara. She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him back toward the center of town. Only when he had disappeared around the corner did she finally turn and climb the steps to the boarding house. Mrs. Hargrove was in the front parlor, as she always was in the afternoons, working on her needlepoint with the concentration of a general planning a battle. She looked up when Clara entered, her eyes narrowing. Miss Bennett, she said coolly, I trust you remember our conversation from this morning. I do, ma'am, Clara said, stepping forward and holding out the money. I have your rent. All 8 weeks' worth plus this week that is coming due. Mrs. Hargrove's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She set down her needlepoint and took the money, counting it carefully. Well, she said when she had finished, and there might have been the faintest hint of approval in her voice. I will admit I did not think you would be able to come up with it. Where did you manage to find this? I collected my wages from the saloon, Clara said, which was true enough. She did not feel the need to explain the rest of the story. And I can assure you that from now on I will be paid regularly, so there will be no more delays in the rent. See that there are not, Mrs. Hargrove said, but some of the frost had melted from her expression. You are a good tenant, Miss Bennett, quiet, clean, respectful. I would hate to lose you, but I cannot run a boarding house on promises and good intentions. I understand, ma'am, Clara said. It will not happen again. She climbed the 2 flights of stairs to her room, her legs heavy with exhaustion, now that the adrenaline was wearing off. The room was small and sparse, with barely enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. But it was hers, and it was safe, and she had managed to keep it. She sank down onto the bed and let herself process everything that had happened. James Merrick. Even his name felt good in her mind. She replayed the scene in the saloon over and over, remembering the way he had stood up to Silas without hesitation, the quiet authority in his voice, the controlled power in his stance. He had not needed to resort to violence, but everyone in that room had known he was capable of it if necessary, and then afterward the gentleness with which he had treated her, asking permission to walk her home, admitting that he had been nervous to approach her. It seemed too good to be true. Clara had learned long ago that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But she could not shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, James Merrick was exactly what he appeared to be. A good man who had done the right thing for no reason other than it was right. And he wanted to spend time with her, to get to know her. The thought made her smile despite her exhaustion. That night at the Silver Spur, Silas was in a foul mood. He snapped at everyone who came near him and glared at Clara every time she passed the bar. But when Friday came and the end of her shift rolled around, he counted out $8 and handed it to her without a word. Clara took the money, offered a polite thank you that she did not really mean, and left the saloon with her head held high. The days leading up to Sunday seemed to crawl by. Clara found herself thinking about James constantly, wondering what they would talk about, whether he would really show up or if something would happen to change his mind. She washed and mended her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. It was far from fancy, but it was clean and respectable, and it was the nicest thing she owned. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Clara woke early, too nervous to sleep, and spent extra time arranging her hair into a soft bun at the nape of her neck. She pinched her cheeks to give them color and bit her lips to make them pink. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she barely recognized the hopeful young woman staring back at her. At 5 minutes to noon, there was a knock at the boarding house door. Clara heard Mrs. Hargrove answer it, heard a man's low voice asking for Miss Bennett. Her heart started to race. She grabbed her shawl even though she did not need it in the summer heat and hurried down the stairs. James was standing in the front hall, hat in hand, looking slightly out of place among the boarding house's shabby furniture. But when he saw Clara, his face lit up with a smile that made the whole room seem brighter. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she replied. "You look very nice yourself." He did. He had clearly made an effort, wearing clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. He offered her his arm and she took it, acutely aware of Mrs. Hargrove watching them with interest from the parlor doorway. They walked through town making easy conversation. James told her about life on the Running W ranch, about the cattle drives and the long days in the saddle and the other ranch hands he worked with. Clara found herself relaxing, laughing at his stories, sharing some of her own memories from before her parents died. It felt natural, comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of days. At the hotel restaurant, James insisted on ordering her whatever she wanted. Clara, who had been living on bread and apples for weeks, ordered a steak with potatoes and vegetables and ate every bite while James watched her with obvious satisfaction. Over coffee and pie, they talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. "I want to have my own ranch someday, or," James confessed. "Nothing huge, just a piece of land where I can raise good horses and cattle, build a house, make a life. I have been saving every penny I earned from the Running W for almost 5 years now. I am getting close." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said wistfully. "I have not let myself dream much about the future. It always seems safer to just focus on getting through each day, but if I could have anything, I think I would want a home. A real home, not just a rented room. Somewhere I belonged with people who cared about me." James reached across the table and gently took her hand. "You deserve that, Clara. You deserve a home and people who care about you and so much more." That afternoon marked the beginning of something Clara had never expected to find in Tombstone. James came to see her every Sunday and sometimes on weekday evenings when he could make the ride into town after his work was done. They walked through the streets at sunset, sat on the bench outside the boarding house talking until the stars came out, stole kisses in the shadows that made Clara's heart race and her breath catch. Silas continued to pay her wages every Friday, though he did so with obvious reluctance. Clara suspected that James had made good on his threat to check in because once she saw the cowboy sitting at the bar on a Friday evening, his eyes tracking Silas as the saloon owner counted out money to his employees. Their eyes met across the room and James nodded to her, a silent promise that he was watching out for her. As the weeks turned into months, Clara found herself falling in love. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She had never felt this way about anyone before, had never let herself be this vulnerable. But James was patient and kind and steady as a rock. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, never made promises he could not keep, never gave her reason to doubt his intentions. It was October, 2 months after that first day outside the Silver Spur, when James asked her to take a ride with him. He borrowed a horse and buggy from the ranch and picked her up early on a Sunday morning. They drove north out of Tombstone, into the desert hills where the air was cooler and the views stretched for miles. James pulled the buggy to a stop on a rise overlooking a valley. In the distance, Clara could see a creek lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves turning gold in the autumn light. There was a flat area near the water that would be perfect for building, with good grass for grazing and shelter from the wind. "This is it," James said quietly. "This is the land I want to buy. The owner is willing to sell me 160 acres for a fair price. I have almost enough saved up. Another 6 months, maybe less, and it will be mine." Clara looked at the valley and tried to imagine what James was seeing. A ranch house with a front porch, corrals for horses, fields for cattle, a home. "It is beautiful," she said sincerely. "You will build something wonderful here." James turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "I want to build it with you, Clara. I know we have not been courting for very long, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. I want to marry you, build that house with you, raise a family with you. I want to give you the home you deserve, the life you deserve. Will you marry me?" Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, James, I will marry you. I love you too, so much." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Clara felt like she was flying. All the fear and uncertainty and loneliness of the past 2 years melted away. She had found someone who loved her, who valued her, who wanted to build a life with her. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. They were married in November in a small ceremony at the church in Tombstone. Clara wore a simple white dress that one of the other saloon girls helped her sew, and James wore his best suit. Mrs. Hargrove came to the ceremony along with a few of the ranch hands from the Running W. It was small and simple and perfect. Clara gave notice at the Silver Spur, and if Silas Crowder was relieved to see her go, he had the sense not to show it. James was there when she collected her final wages, making sure every penny was accounted for. Then they packed up her belongings from the boarding house and loaded them onto the wagon. Mrs. Hargrove surprised Clara by giving her a set of embroidered pillowcases as a wedding gift. "You were always a good tenant," the older woman said gruffly. "I hope you will be very happy, Mrs. Merrick." Mrs. Merrick. Clara loved the sound of it. They moved into a small house on the Running W Ranch property while James continued to save money for the land he wanted to buy. It was cramped quarters, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Clara took in sewing and laundry from the other ranch families to earn extra money, and every penny went into the savings jar they kept hidden under a loose floorboard. Life was hard but good. Clara learned to cook over a wood stove, to tend a vegetable garden, to manage a household on very little money. James worked long days on the ranch, often coming home after dark exhausted and covered in dust. But he always greeted her with a kiss, always asked about her day, always made her feel cherished and loved. In December, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told James on Christmas morning, and the look of joy on his face was the best gift she could have asked for. He became even more protective of her, insisting she rest more, taking on extra work to build up their savings faster. By spring, they had enough money saved to make an offer on the land. The owner accepted, and in April of 1884, James Merrick became the owner of 160 acres of prime grazing land in the Arizona Territory. They moved into a tent on the property while James and some of the men from the Running W helped him build a house. Clara, 6 months pregnant and determined to be useful despite James's protests, helped however she could. She brought water and food to the men, held boards in place while they hammered painted window frames. Slowly, the house took shape. 4 rooms with a real wood floor, glass windows, a front porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. They moved in 2 weeks before their baby was born. Clara went into labor on a hot July afternoon, attended by the wife of a neighboring rancher who had experience with birthing. James paced outside for 12 hours wearing a path in the dirt until he heard the sharp cry of a newborn baby. The neighbor woman opened the door with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Merrick, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing just fine." James rushed inside to find Clara propped up in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I thought we could name him William, after your father." James sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face of his son. He felt his throat tighten with emotion. "William Merrick," he said, "it is perfect. You are perfect." "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. James built up his herd of cattle and started breeding horses, earning a reputation for quality stock. Clara kept the house and tended her garden and raised William, who grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's determination. They had a daughter 2 years after William, a sweet-natured child they named Sarah. Then another son, Thomas, born in 1888. The house that had seemed so spacious when they first built it grew crowded and noisy and full of love. James added on 2 more rooms, and then built a barn and corrals and a bunkhouse for the 2 ranch hands he eventually hired to help with the work. Money was never plentiful, but it was enough. They had food on the table and clothes on their backs and a roof over their heads. They had each other. And in the evenings after the children were asleep, James and Clara would sit on the front porch and watch the stars come out over their land, and Clara would remember that day in August when a cowboy had stood up for her and collected her wages and walked her home. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked James one evening, her head resting on his shoulder. "Choosing this life? It is not easy, and we will probably never be wealthy." "Regret it?" James repeated, wrapping his arm around her and pulling her close. "Clara, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. This ranch, our children, the life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed of. I would not change a single thing." "Not even the part where you had to threaten Silas Crowder," Clara teased. James laughed. "Especially not that part. Though I heard he sold the Silver Spur last year and moved to California. Apparently his luck finally ran out." "Good," Clara said with satisfaction. "I hope he learned his lesson about cheating his employees." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of wind through the grass, the occasional low of a cow from the pasture. Clara thought about the frightened, desperate young woman she had been 3 years ago, alone and broke and certain that the world was against her. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything, to ending up on the street with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And then she thought about James Merrick walking up behind her that day, asking if it was true that her boss had not paid her. She thought about the way he had stood up to Silas without hesitation, the way he had collected every penny owed to her, the way he had walked her home to make sure she got there safely. One act of kindness from a stranger had changed the entire trajectory of her life. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I am thinking about how lucky I am, Clara said honestly, and how grateful I am that you decided to get involved that day instead of just walking past. You saved me, James. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, James corrected gently. I was just a ranch hand with some money saved and a dream of owning land. You gave me a reason to make that dream real, a partner to build it with. You work just as hard as I do, Clara. This ranch, this life, it belongs to both of us. Clara tilted her face up to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Over the years that followed, the Merrick Ranch continued to grow and prosper. William grew into a capable young man who loved working with the horses. Sarah developed a talent for healing and often helped care for sick animals and injured ranch hands. Thomas, the youngest, was wild and adventurous, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief. James and Clara grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good years, and scraped through lean ones. They added more rooms to the house as the children grew, built a proper stable for the horses, fenced more pasture. The ranch that had started as a dream became a legacy they would pass on to their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Clara with a gift, a beautiful wooden sign he had carved himself that read Merrick Ranch, established 1884. They hung it over the gate at the entrance to their property, and Clara cried happy tears as she looked at it. I never thought I would have a home with my name on it, she said, wiping at her eyes. When I was working at the Silver Spur, barely scraping by, I could not have imagined this, any of this. You deserve it all and more, James said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, Clara Merrick, and I fall more in love with you every single day. They stood there together, looking at their ranch and the life they had built, and Clara felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. The frightened girl who had stood outside a saloon with empty pockets and no hope was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her own worth, who was loved and valued, who had created something beautiful and lasting. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, Clara thought about all the moments that had led her to this place. Her parents' deaths, which had been so tragic, but had brought her to Tombstone. The desperate poverty that had forced her to take a job at the Silver Spur. Silas Crowder's greed and cruelty, which had pushed her to the breaking point. And James Merrick's kindness and courage, which had been the catalyst for everything that came after. Life had a funny way of working out, she reflected. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. Sometimes a stranger's compassion could change everything. And sometimes when you least expected it, love found you and gave you a reason to hope again. The children came running out of the house then, William calling for his father to come help with one of the horses, Sarah wanting to show her mother a bird's nest she had found, Thomas demanding to know if there would be cake for the anniversary celebration. The peaceful moment shattered into happy chaos, and Clara laughed as she turned to address the requests coming at her from all directions. This was her life now. Loud and messy and full and utterly perfect. She was loved. She was home. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And it all started with a cowboy who refused to walk past an injustice, who collected every penny owed to her, and who walked her home when she had nowhere else to turn. James had given her back her dignity that day, but more than that, he had given her hope. And that hope had blossomed into a love that would last a lifetime. As the years continued to pass, the Merrick Ranch became well known in the territory for quality horses and fair dealing. James's reputation as an honest rancher spread, and he often got offers to buy his stock from buyers who traveled from as far as California and Texas. The children grew strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and integrity from their parents' example. When William turned 18, James gave him a piece of the ranch land to start his own herd. The young man proved to be as skilled and dedicated as his father, and the expansion brought new prosperity to the family. Sarah, who had always been more interested in healing than ranching, went to study with a doctor in Tucson and returned to set up a practice that served the scattered ranching families in the area. Thomas eventually partnered with his father in the horse breeding operation, bringing new ideas and energy to the business. Clara watched her children grow and thrive with a mother's pride. She had given them the stable, loving home she had always dreamed of, the kind of childhood she had lost when her own parents died. They would never know what it was like to be alone and desperate and unsure where the next meal would come from. They would never have to fight as hard as she had just to survive. That knowledge filled her with deep satisfaction. On quiet evenings, when the house was calm and the children were occupied with their own pursuits, James and Clara still made time to sit on the porch together. Their hair had threads of silver now, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter, but the love between them was as strong as it had been that first day when he had stood up for her against Silas Crowder. "Do you remember when we used to sit out here and this was all just empty land?" James asked one evening, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "When we were living in a tent and building the house board by board?" "I remember being so tired I could barely stand," Clara said with a laugh. "Pregnant with William and determined to help anyway. You kept trying to make me rest, and I kept insisting I could paint just one more window frame." "You were stubborn then, and you are stubborn now," James said fondly. "It is one of the things I love most about you. You never give up, never back down from a challenge. You could have let Silas Crowder break your spirit, but you did not. You kept showing up, kept working, kept fighting." "I almost did give up," Clara admitted quietly. "The day you found me outside the saloon, I was so close to just walking away from everything. I did not know how I would survive, but I could not see any other option. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what would have happened to me." James squeezed her hand. "You would have survived. You always do. But I am grateful beyond measure that I was there, that I got to be part of your life, that you chose to take a chance on a cowboy who was nervous to even talk to you." "Best decision I ever made, Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Marrying you, building this life with you, it has been the greatest adventure of my life. Better than anything I could have imagined back when I was just trying to make it through each day." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the desert in familiar, brilliant colors. In the distance, they could hear William calling instructions to the ranch hands, Sarah's laughter as she played with Thomas's children, the sounds of a family and a legacy continuing into the future. The Merrick Ranch was more than just land and cattle and horses now. It was a testament to what two people could build together when they had love and determination and faith in each other. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperate poverty to prosperity, from loneliness to a love that filled every corner of her life, from a rented room in a boarding house to a ranch that bore her name. It had not always been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. And it all came back to that August day in 1883 when a cowboy with kind eyes and a strong sense of justice decided that a woman deserved to be paid for her work. When James Merrick collected every penny owed to her and walked her home, he had no idea that he was setting both of their lives on a new path. He had just been trying to do the right thing, but that one act of decency had rippled outward, creating waves that touched every aspect of their future. Clara had learned many lessons in her life, but the one she valued most was this: sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and do what is right to change everything. James had been that person for her, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting, a love story set against the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, a tale of second chances and new beginnings and the transformative power of compassion. As they finally rose from the porch and went inside to join their family for dinner, Clara took one last look at the land spread out before them. The ranch they had built, the home they had created, the life they had forged together from nothing but hope and hard work and unwavering love. This was her legacy. This was her triumph. This was her happily ever after, earned through perseverance and faith and the courage to trust in a stranger's kindness. And she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here.